Hello, and today we're going to be talking about using your EQ properly. So a lot of people like to suggest that a graphic equalizer like FabFilter Pro Q introduces the problem where you start to mix with your eyes instead of your ears. While I don't entirely agree that a bunch of people just end up mixing with their face, there is some truth to it, but it's not even a bad thing. So mainly the issue with people mixing with their faces is that they're not listening with their ears at the same time because they haven't had enough experience, or they're having a hard time focusing on two things, or they haven't trained their ears or whatever. So mixing with a graphic equalizer like this comes with either like listening in two sets or just having a solid sense of what you're doing and then doing it while being able to listen to it, or listen to it as soon as you make your final change on like a band, like, oh, I want to high pass that, listen to it. And then if you have something like FabFilter Pro Q, you're making absolute use of this button to listen to what you cut off. You're making perfect use of this power on or off, or the bypass button. And finally, you have your EQ set to 6 decibels as so instead of the regular 12. You can switch this to 6 and then change it in your default setting. What this allows you to do is to really understand the movements you make, because now something that's like this looks a lot bigger, but it does a lot less. Whereas if I was on the 12 setting, it doesn't look like it does as much. And if you're on 30, it definitely doesn't look like it does a lot at all. So keeping down to around the 6 value is definitely my recommendation for using EQs. I love to have my EQs like read 6 up and down. And as you can hear, we have the hear option. I can bypass my button with a variety of buttons. So the issue with doing this sort of graphic equalizing is when people just like listen to a sound and then they're like, okay, well, here's what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna like do all these things without actually paying attention. So it's basically like, to them, the equivalent of doing this is if you were to take this sound and say I soloed this track, had this run, and then I was just like, oh yeah, that looks great. Oh yeah, perfect. And then, oh, I want more of these. This is the issue with graphic equalizing. It's when you're not paying attention to your ears and you're just doing what sounds good. So then to the point you might as well not even have headphones on because you don't use your ears. However, if you can use your ears and the graphic equalizer at the same time, you basically can use your face to attack the problem and your ears to confirm the solution. As so. Cool, I like that. And as you can see, I did get rid of mud. And I used this with my ears because I could see this mud. It's all unintelligible frequencies. So let's get rid of them. And then I can see some sort of frequencies bulging up in the 600 area where the mud is. So then, why not just stick a bell pass in here? And then just EQ. Sort of like this. Use your eyes to find the problem. Use your ears to confirm the solution. And if it's the case where what you thought you saw wasn't actually the solution to what you heard was wrong also, that's when you slowly start to understand what sort of what more advanced problems look like, but your eyes can be the solution to very basic problems like low cuts or high boost or mud removal. Another issue that people have with their EQs is that no one uses the 2 or the 2.5 options in the Q value. One is sort of a broad thing, and in most situations, there's not going to be really a point where you're just going to like do something like a big change like this. If you're going over like 2 decibels positive or negative, you should probably change your Q value to 2, because then your EQ is going to start affecting things that you weren't trying to affect. The 1Q is a very broad EQ change to make, and you'll notice that if you've ever looked on any other equalizers like analog ones or the equalizer off of like Reason or Logic Pro, you kind of understand that the one band is quite wide and it makes a big difference. And the point of an EQ isn't to make a big difference, it's to fix things that are unavoidable in the sound design stage or the recording stage or mistakes. The EQ is not here to sound design a whole new sound in mixing cases. If you don't have a EQ like this one, I highly recommend doing this and sort of looking for the sounds you might be hearing in your ear to really find them. However, if you do it this way, you might be basically giving yourself a reason to just EQ for no point, because essentially everything you listen to like this is just going to sound bad inherently. But I can see with my eyes, I want this to go. It's ringy. So now it's gone. Fix it. Something that could have been done with eyes or with your ears. However, when you're making such subtle changes that aren't even for the sound, and they're more for like the actual mix, it's when it becomes a little more difficult to actually do things with your ears, because you might not fully comprehend those sorts of sounds. You might not fully comprehend these small changes in the mix itself. You don't start to notice these sorts of things until you get over to the mixing, to the mastering stage, when you start doing compression and you've already removed a lot of mud or too much root tone or too much high-end attack. And then your compressors react a lot better than they would if you didn't make these subtle EQ changes that you can't hear in too much detail. And on this sound, I could always try raising the high end. On every sound, you basically want to go to a low pass or low cut and just use it and be like, does it help? Does it improve? Use it with your mix. If it's not helping in the mix, you don't need a low pass. Try the like bell filter. Is it helping? If not, you probably don't need it. Try it with the mix. Everything. Move it around. Same thing with a high pass. Move it around. I actually like my high pass down like this, even though I had it up higher. So maybe I'll go with this guitar sound. In this sort of situation, I have all these high frequencies here doing most of the... I have all these atmospheres doing most of the high frequency work. And this is why graphic equalizers are also insanely important. Look at what I'm doing here and look at the graphic equalizer. What's that down there? And there's some stuff trailing out over here. You don't need these sorts of sounds, so that's when, again, the eyeballs are like, okay, get rid of this, do something like this. Whole sound, gone. I'm not using these high frequencies as much. Okay, do something like this. Maybe let's do a 6 instead of that. So got rid of some of that. Got rid of a little of that. There's some low-end stuff there you can't hear, but if this Pro Q's picking it up, your master compressors are going to pick it up, and it's going to work against you later on. So I've attacked my sound sort of like so. Little more control, let's listen to it in the mix. I've totally stopped those from like taking up as much obnoxious space as they were before. The eyes are a very important mixing tool, just like the ears. Don't forget that. Look at these drums. I've already done some stuff, but let's just default setting it. Also, some people might complain, like, don't use freaking presets and equalizers. Oh my god, that's such a horrible idea. Yeah, like, if I'm just gonna use something like this and then put it on my drums, probably gonna have issues. Most presets aren't gonna really do much for you anyways. Like, look at this preset. You could use this on anything and not even notice. Like, so, like, using presets isn't the end of the world by any means. They just can't be anything, like, ridiculous. Like this. But for example, there's already a drum set here. How does it sound? This one's in 12 decibels, not 6, so now here we go, better understanding. These sound a little more punchy. This actually sounds just fine. It was a preset. Just boosted some of this, some fundamental tone of the kick and some of the snare, and then it boosted the high-end attacks. For, like, kind of the hi-hat area. Sounds fine to me. It cut out some of the 20 mud that I can't hear, but again, it's going to work against me in the master compressor. This stuff gets cut out anyways later, but sometimes it's nice to just cut it out early anyways, because then it puts up less of a fight when you go to try to cut it out with an EQ in the master. And then it just got rid of some high-end. Now this isn't going to do anything again. The stuff that goes on past here is called, like, aliasing, because you can't hear it, and it's basically just, like, pointless phasing. So making this sort of change isn't going to, like, do anything. So it's not doing anything. You could get rid of something like this. Though I believe the point of it was to prevent the EQ from raising the aliasing. Okay, fine. So look at that. I just used a preset out of Pro Q. There's not very many, because people don't really use presets anyways. But if you're going to use a preset that does drastic changes, this is by no means drastic. This is not that big of a deal. This is like a fancy tilt shelf and like some boostings for the hi-hats attack and for the kicks and snares root tone and a little bit of mud cut. So you should be able to identify these sort of things when you open an EQ anyways. And if you know your EQs in and out, you should be able to look at this and be like, no, that's too much for this sound, regardless of having the spectrum on or not. And if you even look at a spectrum, you can see how a sound is like intact and how it works by itself. Now, obviously, if you do too much with it with an EQ, you're going to ruin the initial sound. But that's not what you went into the EQ to do. You went in there to fix it, not to ruin it. So don't make any changes that are going to ruin it and use your ears as well as your eyes. You can find all of the most basic problems for mixing with your eyes, and then you can hear the more advanced surgical things with your ears, and you might be able to see them with your eyes too, depending on how often you use EQs. Or how often you mix shitty things. Now, there's no bass in this song, so there's no bass in this little piece, so I technically could keep in the bass the guitar. However, the only issue with that is it's going to start to interfere with the kick. So maybe not. And in case if anyone's wondering if there's mastering, there's not. There's a peak limiter, which is just kind of raising the volume because I have everything on -10 already. So that's it. That was my little EQ point out. It's okay to use the eyes. Use the eyes less than the ears, but the eyes are the best quick mixing tool. They can be a really good mixing tool. It's just about like, do you know how to work with your eyes? Like, do you trust your eyes? There's a lot of older engineers that I work with who do mixing and mastering, and they're always like laughing at the students or their colleagues, younger colleagues, who are always like, oh yeah, like I like using this EQ or turning off my spectrum or whatever. Or, you know, they're like, oh, I like the ozone plugins because their spectrums don't give away too many details, so it's like hard to make too many drastic changes visually that could cause issues because they just look visually appealing. And then you have like 50-year-old, 60-year-old guys who are like, they're like, I don't even mix or master with like the studio monitors on. I just use my eyes. Because depending on the rooms and the situations and age and all sorts of things, your ears can lie harder than your eyes, and sometimes it's reverse. So you need both. You need all the visual aspects and the ear aspects together. And I think it's completely foolish to discard that sort of statement and be like, no, you can do everything with just your ears. I think that's silly. You need the best of both worlds.